Hey, curious soul, what part of this wild world are you watching from? A cozy town? A fast-paced capital? Type it down in the comments. And if this video earns a thumbs up from you, be a legend and share it with others. Showtime. Do you think this is easy for me to put into words? Then step back and give me a moment. I'm sorry if I sound sharp, but I'm still tangled in a bitterness that clings no matter how many years slip by. Life used to feel stable, good even, until I uncovered my wife's secret. She was gifted. I might have coped with the knowledge itself. What I couldn't bear was how fiercely she embraced it, how proud she was to stand apart from the rest of us. She called it a blessing. To me, it was a curse in disguise. I first crossed paths with Sierra McKee what feels like another lifetime ago, when we both worked at a big telecom firm in Inverness. She coordinated dispatch. I was the field engineer climbing poles and fixing lines. Her gentle Highland accent hooked me before I ever laid eyes on her. And when I finally did, I found a red-haired beauty with a sly smile, bright eyes and freckles scattered across her nose like stars in a constellation. Later, she confessed what had first drawn her attention. My name, Ross Reed McCallan. It amused her that I shared it with Scotland's most notorious 17th-century outlaw. Maybe she liked the idea of taming a rogue of her own. My job sent me roaming across the Highlands, erecting masts and repairing receivers to bring faster broadband to remote places. It wasn't the work itself that thrilled me, but the scenery that came with it. My office was the raw, untamed beauty of the Scottish wilds, the crisp air, rolling hills, and soft light that stirred something deep inside me. After our son Ryan was born, Sierra convinced me to settle in her hometown of Lochmagandy. If I could go back, I'd hesitate. Not because the place lacked beauty, it was breathtaking. Her family was close by, always ready to watch Ryan for an evening or a weekend. What I hadn't foreseen was the village itself, a tightly woven matriarchal enclave. The women ruled every household and every gathering, while the men nursed pints of beer or whiskey at the pub, talking sheep prices and the next change in weather. On a clear day, Lochmagandy looked like paradise. Whitewashed cottages climbed the slopes, and at its center, clustered around the village square where the road ended at the loch, stood modest shops and stone houses. Encircled by the hills of Hoke Magandy, the glen felt sheltered, almost protected from biting winds and winter storms. But when clouds pressed low and smothered the peaks, the beauty dulled. The air grew heavy, the land itself seemed to brood. On those days, it was easy to believe the legend murmured about the loch, that Morag MacDarrell's restless spirit lingered there. Her tale had been passed down for centuries. In the summer of 1744, Morag, a striking young woman bursting with life, met a horrific end. Life was harsher then, survival earned the hard way. She was barely 18 when tragedy found her. According to the story, Morag liked harmless flirtation with village boys, perhaps searching for a suitor. But one summer night, 4 of them cornered her on her way home from the fields. They probably expected her to yield quietly. Instead, Morag fought like a wildcat, clawing at their faces and hands in a desperate bid to protect herself. That night, her father led the search party that found her body, floating face down in the shallows at the loch's edge. At first, people whispered she'd drowned while bathing in the ravine. But the truth soon surfaced. She'd been attacked. The 4 young men bore scratches that betrayed them, though they swore they knew nothing of her death. In a small Highland village, losing 4 strong men to punishment would cripple the community's labor. Donald MacDarrell, clan chief and Morag's own kinsman, presided over the matter himself. Acting as judge and jury, he dismissed the accusations outright. The men walked free. They returned to their daily work, while the women of the village whispered of justice denied. Through that winter, unease and superstition simmered in every home. Highlanders are deeply attuned to their land, and many believed Morag's spirit would never find peace. The loch, they said, was cursed, and fate itself would avenge her. And in time their fears seemed justified. By 1745, Donald MacDarrell and the very men implicated in Morag's death marched to war under Bonnie Prince Charlie. Almost none of them ever came back. On April 16, 1746, The fateful day of the Battle of Culloden, the Highland warriors marched into combat. Among them were Donald and the very young men whose hands had brought about Morag's death. They faced the forces of Prince William, Duke of Cumberland, and not one of them returned alive. Their loss plunged the women of the glen into unrelenting sorrow and despair far beyond grief. With their husbands, brothers, and sons lying dead on the moor, the women were left staring into an abyss of ruin. Their way of life, already precarious, now tottered on the edge of collapse. Starvation and poverty crept ever closer, and whispers spread that the valley might have to be abandoned altogether. Some feared the only future left to them was to beg in lowland towns, or worse, to trade their dignity merely to keep living. That these women endured, and even managed to rebuild what had been torn from them, testifies to two truths in equal measure: an iron-hard instinct to survive, and a willingness to do whatever desperate thing survival might demand. With no men left to guide them, leadership fell unexpectedly to the widow of old McDarrell. Gathering a small band of determined women, she set out for Inverness and secured an audience with two formidable figures, the dreaded Butcher Cumberland himself and General George Wade. What transpired behind closed doors remains cloaked in rumor even now. Yet not long afterward, Glen Magandy's fate shifted in a most improbable way. The valley was repurposed as a staging post and supply base for the British Army, its lone defensible road providing clear military advantage. Some say this practical benefit alone swayed Wade's decision. Others whisper the women promised far more personal forms of hospitality to secure their safety. Whatever the truth, the outcome reshaped the Highlands. By the last decades of the 18th century, the mountains of Hoke Magandy were no longer merely a rugged landmark. They had become synonymous with revelry and indulgence. Many Highlanders sneered at what they saw as shameful surrender. Others viewed it as sheer pragmatism, the only viable path for survival. While neighboring glens withered under brutal suppression, Glen Magandy quietly prospered. Soldiers passed through, crops were sown, and a fragile new life began to take root. Within their secluded valley, the women forged a piece of their own making. They spun and wove wool of exceptional quality, their cloth coveted in the markets of Edinburgh and London alike. Children grew up in this strange new order, many fathered by passing soldiers, their lineage a mingling of McDarrell blood and foreign stock. The clan's leadership itself evolved into something unprecedented. Power now passed from mother to eldest daughter, establishing a matriarchal tradition unlike any other in the Highlands. Still haunted by the brutal death of Morag McDarrell, the women guarded their valley fiercely. Some of their precautions were severe, others quietly cunning, but all were born of one unshakable vow: never again would such violence be allowed to touch them. By the time the events I recount truly begin, 5 years had already passed since we'd settled in Lochmagandy. Sierra and I were on the cusp of our 7th wedding anniversary, and I felt a contentment I had never dared imagine in younger days. As spring gave way to summer, I often joked I was as happy as a pig stretched out on warm heather. Each time I returned from my travels, Sierra greeted me with a passion almost startling, like a hunting dog gone half mad with excitement after too long penned up. That Friday began like any other, unremarkable in every outward way. Our son Ryan had gone to stay overnight with Aunt Maggie and Uncle Duncan, visiting his cousin Malcolm, another fiery-haired 6-year-old. The two boys were inseparable, nicknamed the Ginger Nuts by everyone who knew them. After a week spent inspecting equipment in the north, I stopped by Maggie and Duncan's on my way home to greet Ryan and thank them for giving Sierra and me an evening alone. Ryan gave me a quick hug, but his thoughts were already with Malcolm. I could see at once I no longer occupied the center of his world. Watching the boys together, I found myself hoping they might remain as close in adulthood as they were now. When I finally stepped through our own door, the scent of beef stew and wild mountain thyme enveloped me like an embrace. Sierra bustled about, setting the table with her characteristic energy. Two tall candles flickered at its center, unmistakable signs she hoped the evening would turn romantic. A bottle of Côte du Rhône stood uncorked on the sideboard, waiting. Wordlessly, she passed me a chilled beer as I shrugged off my coat and tossed my travel-stained clothes into the basket. It always took me half an hour or so to shed the tension of the road. Sierra knew this rhythm well. She never pushed for serious talk straight away. Instead, she filled the space with easy chatter, recounting gossip and small village tidings as I sipped my drink and let myself unwind. She stirred the stew, warmed plates in the top oven, and drifted into talk of the grand celebration planned for the next evening, the 18th birthday of young Connor McDarrell. Connor's mother, Faith, now the lady chief of the clan, was hosting the affair. Fiddlers, reels, dancers, and feasting enough to draw folk from every corner of the county. Sierra had grown close to Faith and had thrown herself into preparations with contagious enthusiasm. Each time I called from the road, it seemed she was at the McDarrells, helping organize one detail or another. She spoke of the celebration often, her pride in playing a role in Connor's milestone brimming over. That night at dinner, she marveled again at how quickly Connor had grown, 18 years old already, come morning. Later, in the sitting room, she showed me the gift she had chosen for him, a gold ring engraved with the letters CS, their curves beautifully entwined. "Why not CM for Connor McDarrell?" I asked without much thought. She hesitated, then replied briskly, "Stuart is his middle name," snapping the velvet box shut with a quick motion and setting it aside on the table. The odd note barely registered. Her playful grin and bright eyes had already shifted the mood. With one glance, I knew she was ready to lead me upstairs. In the Highlands, cottages are rarely more than a single story, hunkered close to the earth to withstand the wind. Ours was no different, compact, with no stairs to climb, warm and unassuming. Before long, Sierra and I were under the heavy quilts of our wide bed, the quiet settling over us like mist on the hills. Ryan left not long after, and I assumed that by Saturday morning the day would belong to us. But at first light, Sierra was already up, bright, efficient, moving with purpose, while I dozed in and out as she showered and dressed. "Up you get, lazy bones," she said with a teasing smile, fastening her coat. "I'm off to Faith's for a bit. I'll stop at the bakery on my way back and grab some breakfast rolls. You just stay put for once. After we eat, we'll go pick up Ryan." When she closed the door behind her, silence filled the house. For a moment, I considered obeying her, sinking deeper into the comfort of the bed. But the thought of chores gnawed at me. With a sigh, I rose, showered quickly, and threw on jeans and my old green and black plaid shirt. The washing machine hummed to life as I tidied the living room, and that's when I saw it. On the coffee table lay a small red box, the ring still nestled inside. Beside it was an envelope bearing Connor McDarrell's name. Clearly, Sierra had forgotten to take them in her rush out the door. We could have given them to Connor later, but it seemed easier to deliver them now. His cottage was set apart from the village, surrounded by his own land, a good mile away if you followed the road, but less than half that if you cut through the meadows. A brisk walk might even clear the lingering whiskey fog from my head. From the crest of the fields, the village shimmered faintly by the lake shore. Sheep pastures stretched in every direction, grass tall and lush. I vaulted 2 dry stone walls and reached the weathered barn adjoining Connor's cottage about 20 minutes later. To reach the front door, I had to circle around the northern side of the house. The chief's home was an old structure, low, whitewashed stone with a slate roof where thatch had long ago been stripped away. Built more than 2 centuries earlier, it was designed for warmth and survival. Narrow windows faced north and west, the sides most battered by wind and rain. As I rounded the northern wall, something in the larger window caught my eye and stopped me cold. "Sierra, Through the glass, I saw her sprawled across a broad double bed, and beside her, unmistakable, even in the dim light, was Connor McDarrell. For a heartbeat, everything inside me froze. The air vanished from my lungs. The world went utterly still. At first, I couldn't even place the man's face, but when he turned toward the light, recognition struck like a blow to the gut. I stumbled back from the window, pressing my shoulders to the cold stone wall, dragging air into my chest. The image seared itself into my mind, a brand I could never unsee. If I hadn't been standing there, I would never have believed it. My stomach lurched violently. Nausea surged through me. Bent over, hands braced on my knees, I fought to steady myself. A minute, 2 minutes, I couldn't tell. My training as a maintenance engineer had taught me to stay calm in a crisis, to assess before reacting. I didn't know why Sierra had done this. I couldn't even begin to guess. But I knew one thing. Exploding now would solve nothing, and would devastate Ryan most of all. Keeping low, I backed away from the window and retraced my steps. I slipped behind the barn, staying hidden among the pines until the cottage disappeared from sight. My mind thrashed in chaos, betrayal, confusion, fury, but through it all, one thought clawed its way forward. She must have planned this, and the only reason I'd discovered it was because I hadn't stayed in bed as she'd urged. Back at our cottage, I returned the ring box and the envelope to the coffee table, precisely where I'd found them. In the kitchen, I scribbled a quick note. Gone walking around Humagandi. Weather's too fine to waste. Sierra knew that route well. 12 miles around the 3 highest peaks. 6 hours gone with only a packed lunch. And so I walked. I climbed ridges, crossed windswept slopes, and let the vastness of the highlands swallow me whole. The hills were silent, but for the cry of distant curlews. The air was sharp, clean, merciless. Step by step, the raw sting dulled, replaced by something colder, harder. By the time I returned in the late afternoon, I still didn't know what I would do. Nothing could undo what I had seen. Whatever marriage I thought I had, it no longer existed. Decisions lay ahead, and none of them would be easy. But one truth was clear. I would not shatter everything, not yet. In small communities like ours, word travels faster than fire across dry heather. A whisper becomes a rumor becomes gospel. For now, I would hold my silence. Under no condition, absolutely none, did I ever wish for the entire village, let alone the entire country, to intrude upon the quiet of our private lives. Holidays had a peculiar way of dragging intimate troubles into the open, a perilous kind of exposure where even the faintest clue, a husband who didn't show up, a wife whose expression seemed strained, or a child celebrating with a bruise, could set tongues wagging for weeks. The walk I took through the hills earlier had helped clear my head a little, but when I returned after lunch, I still found it hard to meet Sierra's gaze. Thankfully, Ryan was there to cut through the silence. He climbed up beside me on the sofa, brimming with excitement about the adventures he'd shared with his cousin. His proudest discovery? A handful of snails Malcolm had unearthed from the garden soil. For a boy barely 6, Ryan's understanding of the natural world was remarkable. We ended up discussing how snails and slugs differ. After pondering for a moment, he concluded, quite seriously, that snails must be the clever ones, since they'd gone and grown themselves shells to stay safe. Sierra, meanwhile, kept herself busy in the kitchen. The scent of sizzling Aberdeen Angus burgers filled the house, and by 6 o'clock, we were gathered at the table, just in time to avoid Ryan's inevitable dinner-time meltdown. Over the meal, our talk shifted toward the evening celebration, which was scheduled to start early enough to keep the younger children content. Ryan and I would wear our red Macallan kilts, and all 3 of us would head over to the hall together, arriving around 7 when the festivities were due to begin. Ryan was already well aware that the night's entertainment would start with a clown performing tricks for the children, a distraction for them while the grown-ups mingled with drinks in hand. We hadn't planned how late we'd stay. That would depend entirely on how well Ryan held up as the night went on. There's something enchanting about a Scottish village dance. Neighbors and strangers alike laughing, linking arms, spinning through patterns they half remember from childhood. It's a kind of magic found elsewhere too, in barn dances, in line dances, in circles around bonfires. In a place as close-knit as Loma Gandhi, everyone eventually dances with everyone else, and tonight was no different. Khalid began the evening by guiding the children through easy steps, with parents and grandparents joining in to steady them when they faltered. Ryan's favorite was the Dashing White Sergeant, a dance he'd practiced at school. The three of us, Ryan, Sierra, and I, formed a small family unit, clasping hands with others to whirl around the floor, breaking into groups of 6 before switching partners for the next turn. To an outsider, I imagine we looked like the perfect family, laughing, graceful, full of rhythm. Inside, I was barely holding the act together. Sierra, despite everything that had unraveled earlier that morning, seemed untouched by it all, smiling, luminous, soaking up compliments about our gifted boy and the charm of the three of us dancing together. I kept glancing across the hall, bracing for her to slip away and find an excuse to speak to Connor McDarrell, but she didn't. Beyond a polite greeting when we arrived, handing him a card, a wrapped gift, and a bright, happy birthday, she acted as though he wasn't there. Watching her, even I started to doubt what I'd suspected. Maybe it truly had been nothing more than a passing fancy. As the night wore on, Ryan began to fade. Sierra spent most of her time hovering nearby, watching him play with Malcolm and the other children. I assumed she'd expect me to take Ryan home early, leaving her free to dance and maybe flirt with Connor. But instead, she'd arranged something unexpected. Ryan and Malcolm would both spend the night at our house. Around 9:30, Sierra and Maggie bundled the boys into the car and drove them home. Maggie came back roughly half an hour later to explain the arrangement. They'd devised a system where each would take turns watching the boys for an hour, freeing the other to enjoy the party. Sierra, she told me, would return in about an hour to relieve her. I tried to keep busy. I danced with Maggie, then with a few other women, forcing myself to look carefree. Conversation was impossible over the blare of the music, which was probably for the best. Eventually, I drifted toward the fringes of the hall, beer in hand, listening to the fiddlers weave their reels, strathspeys, and jigs. My gaze followed the band, though in truth I was scanning the crowd, hunting for any hint, any glance that might betray what people really thought about Sierra and me. Now and then, I caught a woman's eye. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe pity, or maybe it meant nothing at all. Connor McDarrell, the man of the hour, was having his share of attention. His grandmothers, his aunts, his mother's friends, they all took turns spinning him across the floor. When the women needed a breather, the men stepped in, clapping him on the back, buying him beers, ensuring his birthday stayed as lively as the night promised. There was no denying the magnetism he carried, that effortless pull that seemed to draw people in without him even trying. On another night, under different circumstances, I might have been the one to offer him a drink. But tonight was not one of those nights. As I waited at the bar for my pint, I noticed the empty stool beside me had been claimed by none other than Derek, Connor's father. Whether he knew anything about what had been happening between Connor and Sierra, I couldn't say. But here he was, placed beside me by sheer coincidence. A chance to feel out the situation, if only delicately. "You must be proud of him," I remarked, offering a polite smile. Derek gave a slow nod. "I suppose I am," he said evenly. Not cold, but carefully measured. "Was Connor named after anyone?" I asked, keeping my tone light, conversational. "After his mother's father," Derek replied with a slight incline of his head. "And his middle name?" I pressed. "Would that be yours?" "Not mine," he corrected gently. "That's Hector, his father's father." "Ah," I said, feigning casual interest. "Are either of them here tonight?" "Only in memory," Derek said softly. "Connor's grandfather moved to Canada years ago. Hector lives in Australia with my sister's family." A shame they couldn't make it, I murmured, ending the exchange as I handed over payment for my drink. Even in its brevity, the conversation left me with what I needed. Confirmation that my earlier suspicion hadn't been some wild, baseless thought. The gold ring I'd seen carried a C, unmistakably Connor's initial, entwined with another I could only assume was Sierra's. To anyone else it might look romantic. To me it was a mocking emblem of betrayal. My mood soured further when Sierra reappeared just past 11. Her eyes swept the room, found me, and she gave a small wave before heading straight toward Connor McDarrell. Was this what they'd been waiting for all evening? At first glance, it could have passed for something harmless, my wife joining the guest of honor for a simple dance. But the anticipation etched across both their faces told a different story. He didn't hesitate, she didn't resist. Within moments, they were gliding across the floor, laughter spilling from her lips as easily as his. Most would have missed it. But I had been watching closely all night, studying every glance, every half-smile, every knowing look from those already in on the secret. From the corner of my eye, I caught Sierra's mother and sister exchanging brief, sidelong glances in my direction, furtive, almost amused. They knew, or at the very least they suspected. The realization twisted deep, sharp. I forced my face into something neutral and stayed where I was until they'd finished 2 dances. When it became clear they weren't about to leave the floor anytime soon, I slipped quietly outside, the need for fresh air stronger than anything else. The night pressed down heavy and silent, a darkness that seemed to swallow sound itself. Even out there, away from the music and chatter, the humiliation clung to me, the gnawing certainty that half the village had already pieced it together. Derek found me moments later. "You're not yourself, Ross," he said quietly. "Something wrong?" "Your son," I answered flatly, "and my wife." He let out a sharp breath, unsurprised. "So you've worked it out?" "Seems like everyone has," I muttered. "Please," he said carefully, choosing his words. "Don't make a scene tonight. Faith wants to speak with you tomorrow morning. She believes she can clarify things. Just hold on until then." I studied him in silence. "When Sierra takes Ryan to church, come meet us," Derek continued. "Faith will explain everything. Can I tell her you'll be there?" I hesitated. "I don't know what good it'll do, Derek. But fine, I'll wait. I won't cause trouble tonight, just keep Connor away from her. I don't need to watch them flaunt it." "Thank you," he said, relief flickering faintly across his features. "I'll speak to him." I lingered outside a few more minutes, letting the cool air steady me before heading back inside. By then, Sierra was dancing with Duncan, her brother-in-law, while Connor had taken the floor with his older sister Heather, a striking 22-year-old with raven hair, next in line for the chieftainship, currently studying finance in Inverness. When the music finally stopped, Sierra bounded toward me, radiant, wrapping her arms around me and kissing me on the lips. Her joy was unrestrained. She hadn't the faintest idea I knew. We closed the night with one last dance before walking hand in hand up the hill toward our cottage. I smiled, nodded at her excitement as she gushed about the party, the music, the laughter, how everyone had loved it, how unforgettable the night had been. And I let her speak, because silence was all I could offer. I kept my head down, only tossing out the occasional empty remark, a soft "yeah" here, a quiet "right" there, just enough to keep her words flowing without truly listening. Maggie beamed when she saw us, her whole face brightening as she happily agreed to let Sierra and me take the boys to church the next morning. She mentioned that Malcolm planned to meet our parents there later. Sierra peeked in on the boys, making sure they were tucked in, and headed straight for bed. By the time I'd finished brushing my teeth, she was already fast asleep, breathing in that steady, untroubled rhythm as if nothing at all pressed on her mind. I couldn't do the same. I stared into the dark, restless thoughts churning, trying to imagine what the clan leader could possibly say to cut through the storm I carried inside. Deep down, I already knew. My marriage felt mortally wounded, and I doubted even Lady Faith or anyone else could bring it back to life. The next morning, Sierra was the one who took charge. She got breakfast ready for the boys and shepherded them off to church herself. I'd muttered something about a headache and the need for fresh air, though truthfully, I just couldn't face that crowd again. As the faithful of Lokma Gandhi streamed toward the kirk that Saturday, I retraced the same lonely path I'd walked the day before, back toward heartbreak. Soon enough, I was standing at the door of the chief's cottage. When I knocked, Faith opened almost instantly. "Thank you for coming, Ross," she said softly, gesturing me inside. "Everyone's at church, so we'll have privacy. I'll put the kettle on. Tea, unless you'd rather have whiskey?" I didn't want tea, but refusing would have felt rude, and the talk we were about to have was going to be heavy enough without me starting off on the wrong foot. Faith came back carrying 2 steaming mugs, and we settled into the padded armchairs facing each other, the faint crackle of the hearth between us. I waited silently for her to speak first. "I'm sorry to hear about Sierra and Connor," she said at last, genuine worry in her voice. "Can I ask how you found out?" I locked my jaw, fighting to stay calm, especially with little Ryan and Malcolm so often nearby. But Faith must have read the fury in my eyes. "It doesn't matter how I know," I said flatly. "Nobody's told me straight, but it seems half the village knows your son's been keeping my wife company." "Ross," Faith murmured, "there's more to this than you understand. It's a long story, but I need you to listen to all of it before you make any decisions. Can you promise me that?" I blew out a sharp breath. "Fine, go ahead, but I doubt it'll change anything." "Thank you," she said. "I won't deny that Sierra and Connor were close, but you don't know the whole picture. Sierra was gifted." "Gifted?" I echoed, incredulous. "You mean talented? Blessed?" "No," Faith said, shaking her head. "I mean the gift a woman offers a young man when he comes of age." I stared at her, stunned. "Are you saying Sierra and Connor were together because of some custom? A rite of passage for boys turning 18? "In a way, yes," she replied. "It's part of an old Glen McGandy tradition, one that started after Morag McDarrell's time. Everyone knows Morag's tale. After 1745, when the Glen's men were lost or scattered, the women rebuilt the valley themselves. They worked tirelessly to keep the community alive. They even slept with redcoat soldiers," I cut in bitterly. "True," Faith admitted, "but most people don't realize that those same women also swore to protect future generations, especially the young women, from harm caused by reckless men." I frowned. "So let me get this straight. It wasn't enough for those women to take in soldiers. They also started entertaining local boys?" "You're twisting my words, Ross," Faith said firmly. "That's not what it was about. The women chosen for gifting were maidens or widows, women left behind by war. For decades, Glen McGandy's men sought fortunes abroad. They fought in North America, against the French, against native tribes, later against the Mexicans under Santa Anna. Some even bled in the American Civil War. When they weren't fighting, they chased gold in California. And all that time, women were scarce." Her voice dropped, steady but solemn. "The cycle lasted well into the 20th century. Boer War, World War I, the Spanish Civil War, World War II, Korea. For over 200 years, there were always more unmarried women than men. The gifting tradition grew out of that reality." I leaned forward, disbelief written across my face. "If it's meant for unmarried women, then why the hell was Sierra part of it?" "Nowadays," Faith explained, "every woman in the Glen is expected to honor the tradition. But things have changed. Our men aren't dying in battle anymore. That means fewer widows, fewer single women. So now, those chosen to give the gift are often wives whose husbands spend long stretches away, working oil rigs offshore or living in Glasgow or Edinburgh during the week. The idea is simple. The woman is available without destroying her home life." I let out a bitter laugh. "Sounds to me like the whole thing's just an excuse for older women to fool around with young lads." "That's absolutely false," she said, her tone unwavering. "So this is personal for you then, Faith?" I pressed. "You've experienced it yourself?" "I don't owe you an answer," she replied evenly. Then after a pause, she added, "But since you've asked, Ross, yes, I have. It was many years ago. That's all I'm willing to share. Her voice remained steady as she continued. When a woman is gifted to a young man, there are expectations on both sides. They're meant to treat each other with respect, to behave with dignity. The bond is private, discreet, not something flaunted publicly. Sierra and Connor, perhaps, should have been more restrained last night. So what you're telling me, I said bitterly, is that Sierra willingly gave herself to Connor, and the only problem is they weren't subtle about it? It's not that simple, Ross, Faith countered. A gift isn't some casual indulgence. It's offered thoughtfully, with care and gentleness. The tradition begins with a formal courtship, 3 months long, culminating on the young man's 18th birthday. During that time, they meet often, speak about their hopes, their futures. They truly come to know each other. There's no intimacy allowed, beyond perhaps holding hands or sharing a brief kiss. The realization hit me like a stone. Of course. That's why Sierra had been visiting Faith's cottage so often these past months. She'd been with him. She'd been with Connor. This is worse than I imagined, I muttered. You're saying it wasn't an accident. It was intentional, a deliberate arrangement, practically an affair. Faith hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I know how painful this is for you, Ross. But what Sierra and Connor share isn't an affair. It doesn't threaten your marriage. Connor needs guidance. Someone to teach him how to treat women, how to navigate relationships. Sierra volunteered to be that guide. None of us wanted you to find out this way, she added softly. But gifting women is a tradition here, one that's been honored for generations. Gifted women are held in the highest regard. That may be, I snapped. But who decides these things? Who decides who gets gifted to whom? A young man may express a preference, Faith explained, locking eyes with me. But the final choice is made by the clan chief. Neither the boy nor the woman is forced. Each pairing is weighed with great care. So let me guess, I said coldly. Connor told you he wanted Sierra. You approached her, and she agreed. That's an unkind way to frame it, Faith objected. Unkind, but true, I shot back. Who better than her, right? Sierra gets to teach him about love, respect, and manhood. She is the best person for it, Faith said quietly. The only thing he's learning is lust, I retorted. Lust for my wife, disrespect for me, and not a thought for the fallout. And what about pregnancy? I demanded. Is that part of this tradition too? That's a hell of a consequence for a few moments of pleasure. The choice rests with the gifted pair, Faith said evenly. Traditionally, the gift is unconditional. Many children here in the Glen were born this way. Children whose mothers might never have had families otherwise. This custom kept the Highlands alive. After the First and Second World Wars, widows bore children because of gifting. So besides the occasional illegitimate child, I muttered bitterly, what else happens to these women you gift to young men? Very little, Faith replied. In all these years, only 1 or 2 minor issues have arisen, and when problems do occur, we intervene. When was the last time that happened? I asked. When John and Mary MacDonald left for Glasgow, she said softly. Shortly after you moved here. That's why they left, I said, stunned. Yes. Mary grew too attached to the boy she was gifted with. She wanted their bond to last longer than the year allowed. So it wasn't just some fleeting fling? I scoffed. You don't understand, Ross, Faith said patiently. A gift isn't a prize for good behavior. It's meant to anchor young men here, to give them reason to stay. Most of them are uncertain about their future. The gift lasts for 1 year, or until the young man decides to leave the Glen. I stared at her, incredulous. Are you telling me Connor expects to be with Sierra for the next 12 months? Please, Ross, Faith pleaded softly. See this for what it is. Gifting has calmed our young men. It ended the anger, the restlessness, the aggression that used to tear this place apart. These women help them grow into men who respect themselves and others. Of course, there's intimacy in all this. That's unavoidable. But more than the physical, This whole ordeal is about the young man coming to grips with womanhood, learning the nature of relationships, and stepping toward manhood with more understanding than he had before. That might sound acceptable to you, Faith, I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. But do you truly think I'm going to sit back and watch Connor play host to Sierra? The day that happens will be the day pigs start flying over our roof. Ross, Faith said softly, her tone almost maternal. I know this isn't easy for you, but you need to see the bigger picture. This is part of Sierra's birthright. Being a woman of the Glenn McGandy bloodline, she doesn't really have the luxury of choice here, and it won't be forever. If you must talk to her, do it. Just don't come at her with threats. That never ends well. The discussion had hit a dead end. I stood up slowly, feeling heavier than when I'd sat down. I've listened, Faith. I've tried to see it from where you stand. But from where I'm standing, nothing's improving. If anything, it feels worse. Still, thanks for the tea, and for hearing me out. She followed me to the door, her face lined with concern. Please, Ross, don't do anything reckless, and remember, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Stepping out into the cool air, I couldn't shake one thought. Would Faith warn Sierra about what I'd just learned? A part of me almost hoped she wouldn't. I wanted Sierra's reaction raw and unprepared, not something polished or rehearsed. When Sierra and Ryan returned from church later that day, I couldn't tell for sure if Faith had said anything. But Sierra seemed unsettled, a strange tension in her face, like someone walking a tightrope between guilt and composure. Sunday lunches were always Ryan's highlight of the week, bacon rolls sizzling in the kitchen, the air thick with fried bread and the tang of ketchup. His delight was infectious, though we had to keep a constant watch. He had no breaks when it came to food, and spills were inevitable. After we'd eaten, I set him up in the living room with his toy cars. Once his attention was fixed, I went back into the kitchen. Sierra was quietly clearing the table, her movements deliberate, eyes never leaving me as I sat down. She knew exactly why I was there. I skipped any pleasantries. I know about you and Connor, I said evenly. She let out a slow breath, not shocked, almost relieved. I figured you knew, she murmured. Why, Sierra? Why would you do this? Her reply was firm, unflinching. Because I'm a Glenn McGandy woman, Ross. You can pull me out of the Glen, but you can never pull the Glen out of me. It's who I am, my duty, my inheritance. You don't just throw away 2.5 centuries of tradition, she went on, voice gaining strength. This is a lineage passed from mother to daughter, holding everything our family believes sacred. And what about us? I demanded, my voice breaking. Did you ever think about what this would do to us? Of course I did, she said softly. I hate that it hurts you, but I love you, Ross. You love me. This doesn't undo that. What I'm doing here doesn't take away what we have. I don't see how you can claim that, I said, hands trembling. You've broken your vows. You've put our marriage at risk. Don't twist it like that, she pleaded. We can fix this. You'll see. Give it time, and we'll come through stronger. I knew you'd find out eventually, she admitted quietly. I just didn't expect it this soon. I wasn't ready for this conversation. Then she looked at me directly, unflinching. I'm not in love with Connor, Ross, and he isn't in love with me. This isn't an affair. I guide him. I reward him when he earns it. I help him figure out how to face life. That's all it is. It doesn't take anything from you. How can you even say that? I asked bitterly. Because nothing really changes. You still have me. Every moment you're here. When you're away, I look after Connor. You hardly even cross paths with him. Weekends he's out with his mates, off to Inverness for football or whatever music festival's on. That won't change. You're asking me to share my wife, I said, voice low, taut with anger. No, she answered calmly. You have all of me, everything you've always had. I'm 32, Ross. I've got more to give than just what's between us. What I give him doesn't diminish what I give you. It's extra. I shook my head slowly. We'll have to disagree. I don't claim to own you, Sierra. But you are my wife. I'm your husband. I can't accept you setting aside your vows, even for a moment. "That's such a narrow way to see this," she said quietly. "I hoped you'd look past the surface, see the greater good, the honor in what I'm doing." I had been given the duty of guiding this boy's growth into manhood. It wasn't a responsibility one could take lightly. What heightened its weight was the fact that he was the son of the clan's leader. "You speak as though this is some ancient ritual, a sacred transformation," I remarked to Sierra. "But isn't it, in reality, little more than an affair? A restless young man seeking to charm you and win you over?" "You may think so, Ross," she replied evenly. "But this is no ordinary situation. Countless women before me have walked this very path. Most of their husbands, more often than not, accepted it. They considered it a small sacrifice to preserve the Glen's harmony and fortune." "And if one of them didn't agree?" I pressed. "Rarely do they object," she answered. "Most turn a blind eye, and on those rare occasions when a man refuses, he simply leaves the Glen behind. You know as well as I do, Ross, when it comes to choices that shape this valley, the women are the ones who truly hold the reins." "That sounds suspiciously like an ultimatum," I shot back. "Faith warned me never to hand you ultimatums," she said, frustration creeping into her tone. "So why assume I'd start now?" "I'm not forcing your hand," I told her. "Truth is, everyone, including you, would be better off if you stayed still and did nothing. This is new territory for you. You need space to figure out what you really feel." "I think we both need that space," I added. "I know what I probably should do, but I'll give it a few days. If you can promise me one thing, stay away from Connor." I didn't wait for her reply. Instead, I left the room and went to find Ryan to see if he wanted to go out. It was a calm Sunday afternoon. Sierra finally had some solitude, and I had the rare chance to spend precious hours with my son. Work often kept me away during the week, so I clung to moments like these. Ryan and I usually wandered to the lake, scanning the shallows for wading birds. His favorite was always the gray heron, its awkward, stilted legs, the sharp spear of its beak, and its striking blend of gray, white, and black plumage. That afternoon, he spotted one standing still and alone, neck folded against its body, as if trying to vanish into the reeds. For the rest of the day, Sierra and I exchanged only the bare minimum of words. We masked the tension for Ryan's sake as he chattered excitedly about the heron and all the things he hoped to do the following week. He seemed blissfully unaware of the heavy silence weighing on his parents. From what I could tell, Sierra had chosen silence on purpose, hoping that, given time, the strain between us might dissolve and I'd come around to her way of thinking. What she failed to see was how deep my resentment ran, or how hard I worked to keep it bottled up rather than unleash it in an argument. If she kept ignoring my plea to stay away from Connor, there was nothing left for me to do. As I packed my overnight bag later that evening, I couldn't shake the thought of what it would mean if I had to walk away from our home altogether. The idea was unbearable. It felt as though we'd all been thrown into a wreck, and Sierra, the woman I loved, had been torn away from me in an instant. All that remained was my son, and I couldn't even imagine losing him too. I needed time to breathe, to think, to decide what I could possibly do next. The following morning, I rose early and made sure to leave before Sierra came downstairs. I had nearly finished my coffee and was pulling on my jacket when she appeared at the foot of the stairs in her robe. Her eyes were swollen and red, clear evidence she hadn't slept. "Drive carefully, Ross," she said softly as I reached for the door. "And just remember, I love you. Let's talk later this week." "Sure, Sierra," I replied, my voice flat. I didn't give her the satisfaction of hearing the same words in return. Looking back, the days that followed blurred into a haze. Neither of us called the other. That wasn't unusual. My work often took me to remote areas with unreliable reception. It was one of the main reasons we were pushing so hard to modernize the telecommunications grid. By Thursday evening, as always, I checked into the service department the company maintained for me in Inverness. It was a far cry from a sterile hotel room, warm, comfortable, and stocked with everything I needed, even a decent selection of whiskey. I was finishing up my weekly reports for Friday's management meeting when the doorbell rang around 7. Standing on the doorstep was Lady Faith. She wore clothes suited for the chill of the Highlands, a deep green Barber jacket, fitted khaki trousers, and tall, weathered brown leather boots. I could easily imagine her British racing green Range Rover parked at the curb. "Good evening, Ross," she greeted me with a polite smile. "I apologize for dropping in without warning. May I come inside?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her through. She shrugged off her jacket, revealing a simple white blouse under a beige cardigan, and settled gracefully into one of the living room chairs. I can't say I was stunned to find her waiting there, though the sight of her still made me blurt out the first question that came to mind. "You came all the way up to Inverness just to see me, Faith?" "More or less," she answered with a composed shrug. "I saw my daughter earlier today, but the truth is, you're the main reason I came. If you don't mind, could we have some tea before we get into it?" I walked into the kitchen and filled the kettle. Around here, making tea isn't just habit, it's a reflex. "Bad news? Put the kettle on. Something heavy about to be said?" "Boil water first." It gives you a brief pause, a thin layer of ritual between you and whatever's about to crash down. And I needed that pause. Faith's unexpected arrival unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite define. She was older now, modestly dressed, clearly not here for anything romantic. But there was purpose in her visit, that much was obvious, and I silently braced myself for whatever that purpose was. When I returned with 2 cups of tea, steam curling in the air between us, she skipped past any preamble. "Ross," she said, her tone firm but not unkind, "I've spoken with Sierra about everything. We think there might be a way to repair this, at least to some degree. That's why I came." "I'm not expecting miracles," I said cautiously. "But if you've got something to share, I'll listen. Does this mean Sierra isn't going through with the donation?" "Not exactly," Faith replied evenly. "But we've spent a lot of time reflecting on how this must feel for you. Sierra and I realize now that we misjudged your reaction. We want to see if we can make things right, or at least less wrong." "I don't see how that's possible," I muttered. "Not while Sierra is still involved with Connor." "I'm not going to argue over phrasing," Faith said softly, "but I'd prefer if you didn't use crude language. Maybe say she's given herself to Connor rather than the way you just put it." "Fine," I said tightly. "But if she's still giving herself to Connor, what exactly is there to fix?" "That," Faith admitted, "was the hardest part to figure out. We kept seeing only one side, Sierra's side, but then we asked ourselves what this looks like to you. Sierra gains something from this, while you lose." "That's not entirely wrong," I said grudgingly. "Go on." "Thank you," she murmured, almost as if relieved I hadn't walked out already. "I think you might actually like what we've come up with." "And that is?" I asked warily. "Heather?" I frowned. "Heather?" "My daughter," she clarified. "She lives here in Inverness. She can be there for you, while Sierra continues helping her brother in Glenmagandy." I stared at her, unable to hide my shock. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Faith said without hesitation. "Heather admires you. She thinks very highly of you, and she's willing." The words left me reeling. For a moment, I'd clung to the faint hope that Faith might say Sierra had reconsidered, that the donation, or whatever they were calling it, was off. Instead, she was presenting me with her own daughter as some kind of counterweight. Faith knew she'd knocked me off balance. I could see it in the tilt of her head, the way one eyebrow arched as she waited for my response. And in that instant, the fog I'd been drowning in finally cleared. The grief, the stunned numbness, the endless loop of disbelief I'd been stuck in, it all burned away, leaving only a cold, sharp anger. That was when it hit me with brutal clarity. My marriage was already over. Sierra was gone. Nothing Faith offered could undo that. But I also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that one day I'd make them all answer for this. Not here, not now. I couldn't let them see that yet. That's quite an arrangement you're suggesting, Faith, I said evenly. If I'm understanding correctly, Sierra will keep giving herself to Connor. And to even things out, you're offering me Heather? That's exactly it, she confirmed with a nod. I let out a slow breath. All right, I'll think about it. I'll talk to Sierra this weekend. We'll figure out what comes next later. All right, Ross. I guess this is the result we were hoping for. Thanks for the tea, she said softly as she rose from her chair. I'll be staying at Heather's tonight. She slipped me a small note. Here's her number, she added. I'll tell her you might call. Driving back to Glen McGandy that Friday evening, my thoughts were a knotted mess. I couldn't stop replaying the same question in my mind. What was I supposed to do now? For the moment, I wanted one thing: reassurance. I needed to know that Sierra would still enjoy her time with Connor, no matter what decision I made. Because if she truly wanted to pursue something deeper with him, then she and I had no future together. I doubted she'd even stop to think about that possibility. And there was Heather's offer to consider. Accepting it felt like it might be a hollow comfort, but I wouldn't know for sure until I made up my mind. Only then could I focus on building a life that would actually last. When I finally walked through the door, Sierra was brimming with restless energy. Ryan must have done her a favor by keeping me distracted for an hour, then disappearing off to bed. Sierra, on the other hand, seemed intent on reliving the magic of the night we'd shared exactly 1 week earlier. She handed me a cold beer as Ryan chattered away nearby. Then she disappeared into the kitchen and began working on a pot of ragu bolognese. When Ryan was finally asleep, Sierra uncorked a bottle of Barbera d'Asti, and we sat down to eat together. I had a good idea where the conversation was going, but I let Sierra bring it up first. Faith said she talked to you last night, she began carefully. What do you think about the plan we came up with? It's not what I wanted, I admitted. Did you see Connor while I was gone this week? Her gaze dropped to the table. She couldn't look at me. I'm sorry, Ross, she whispered. I've been chosen for him, and I can't say no to that. So Faith was right? You've decided to go through with it? Her face was a storm, anxious, conflicted, but set in its resolve. Yes, she said softly, nodding. I know you hate this, Ross, but I have to do it. I gave her one last chance to walk it back. I hear you, I said quietly. But I still don't understand why you have to. I'm not going to threaten you or trap you with ultimatums. You have to make this decision yourself. I can't stop you, but can you honestly live with whatever comes of it? Yes, Ross. It won't be easy, but I believe I can handle it. And if you need to balance the scales, I won't hold that against you. I think you're making a huge mistake, Sierra, I said, shaking my head. But it sounds like your mind's made up. Is there anything at all I can say or do to change this? No, Ross, she answered steadily. I don't think there ever was. Then she hesitated and said something I never expected. There's something I've never told you. I'm gifted too. I wouldn't even exist if it weren't for that. My mother was gifted, and I'm the product of that gift. My biological father was a young man she was assigned to. The only reason I exist is because of this tradition. So it was only a matter of time before the cycle repeated and I inherited the gift myself. Hold on, I said sharply. You told me your father died in a car crash when your mom was pregnant with you? Are you saying he wasn't actually your father? That's right, she replied. My mom's husband, my dad, did die when his car went off a cliff. I don't know all the details, but the insurance payout covered everything, so we never struggled financially. I don't think my mom ever truly recovered from losing him. She only told me the truth about my biological father when I was a teenager. That's why my medical records never matched what I thought I knew. That's one hell of a revelation, Sierra, I muttered. But I still don't see how that means you need to get involved with some teenage boy. Ross, this is my destiny. The gift brought me into this world, and now I've become gifted myself. In that moment, I understood there was nothing more to say. Nothing that could possibly change her mind. I answered her only with a quiet nod. For several minutes, silence hung between us while we focused on our plates, each absorbed in our own private thoughts. Yet one last question refused to leave me alone. At last I spoke. "From this moment on," I said carefully, "I don't want Ryan spending time with Connor, or anyone in that family. Can you promise me that?" "Of course," she replied almost instantly, though there was an uneasy flicker in her smile. Maybe she thought I was beginning to come to terms with everything, but this wasn't acceptance. It was damage control, my way of protecting our son from what I saw as dangerous influences. The chaos in our family was already more than enough for him to cope with. Later that evening, I poured myself a generous glass of 18-year-old Glenfarclough single malt. I let it linger on my tongue, slow and deliberate, while we sat together with meaningless television chatter filling the room. By the time we finally went to bed, close to midnight, I felt strangely unburdened, as though a weight had been lifted from my chest. Sleep found me quickly, almost merciful in its swiftness. Whether Sierra slept as soundly, I couldn't say. But deep inside, I already knew something fundamental had shifted, and there was no path back to what we'd been before. The next morning, Sunday, I told Sierra I wouldn't be going with her and Ryan to church anymore. I couldn't keep up the charade, couldn't stand there pretending everything was fine while feeling branded as a cuckold for the entire congregation to silently judge. She probably guessed my real reason, but she didn't confront me about it at first. Eventually she asked, "Why won't you come? Have you lost your faith?" "No," I said simply. "I just don't think he's there. I'll walk the hills instead. If God wants to find me, he knows where to look." But that Sunday morning I never saw the hills. Instead, I spent those quiet hours moving my belongings into the guest room. Sierra didn't notice until that night. When she came upstairs and found me lying in bed, lights already off, she stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing in here, Ross?" she whispered. "What does it look like?" I answered calmly. "I'm not sharing a bed with you while you're sharing one with Connor McDarrell." "Oh, come on, Ross, really?" "Damn right," I said flatly. "I won't make a big scene, but this is how it's going to be. Either get used to it or I'll move out entirely. For Ryan's sake, I hope it doesn't come to that." Her expression hardened, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. "Fine, Ross, if that's how you want it. I think you're being ridiculous, cutting off your nose to spite your face. You know where to find me if you change your mind." The following week, during a work trip, I made another decision. I wouldn't approach Heather McDarrell as some warped attempt at evening the score. I wanted nothing to do with that kind of tit-for-tat revenge. If anything developed with Heather, it would be on my own terms and for my own reasons. And only if she wanted it, without coercion or expectation. I'd learned years ago how to pull something good out of a bad situation. Back then, my girlfriend despised my smoking habit. "Kissing you is like kissing an ashtray," she'd complain. Eventually, she gave me an ultimatum. Quit smoking or lose her. I understood her point, so I quit. The first 2 months were hell. Constant irritability, short temper, restless nights. And then, just when I'd finally succeeded, she left me anyway. But that misery turned into something useful. I never smoked again, and in time I grew healthier, fitter. Sierra's affair with Connor felt eerily familiar, another catastrophe I couldn't undo. No matter what I did, the marriage was beyond saving. So I asked myself, what good, if any, could come from this wreckage? One answer emerged: Heather McDarrell. By Wednesday I called her. We arranged to meet for dinner in Inverness the next night. I could have invited her straight over, but that wasn't me. Besides, if this was going to turn into something, we needed to talk first. Over dinner, I learned far more about Heather than I'd expected. She wasn't just beautiful, she was bright, magnetic, and surprisingly easy to talk to. In September, she'd be entering her final year at university, balancing that with a summer position at a respected accounting firm in Inverness. She also mentioned she had a steady boyfriend, Donnie, a student studying agriculture at UHI. During the summer months, he spent most of his time working on a farm and only returned home on weekends. That left her free to spend time with me whenever I happened to be in Inverness, a loose arrangement she jokingly described as friends with benefits. When she first explained this, there was a mischievous spark in her smile. I couldn't help but feel a slight pang of sympathy for Donnie, though she insisted they weren't exclusive. I suspected he didn't share that understanding. Her mother never tried to interfere, So that Thursday evening, I brought Heather back to the apartment. It had been nearly 8 years since I'd been with anyone other than Sierra, and I'd almost forgotten how exhilarating it felt to learn someone new's body and rhythms. Heather wanted something simple, no obligations, just a brief fling with an older man she felt she could trust. That was, in fact, exactly how her mother had described me. The following morning, I took Friday off work and met with a lawyer. I wanted to be prepared for whatever complications might come from the decisions I knew I was about to make. As the warm days slipped into autumn, life somehow managed to become both easier and more complicated. My relationship with Sierra shifted. She still spent time with Connor McDarrell, yet I found I couldn't bring myself to hate her for it. I kept doing the same household tasks as always, but I no longer felt any affection toward her, and stopped going out with her friends or family altogether. Instead, I threw my energy into Ryan. Even when it was just the three of us, I focused on him. For example, when we walked anywhere, I gladly took Ryan's hand in mine, but never hers. Our weekends, surprisingly, remained pleasant. We'd take Ryan on picnics up into the hills or drive out to the coast to buy lobsters and crabs from a small fishing village. Sierra must have known why I'd grown distant, though maybe she assumed it wouldn't last. Without ever talking about it, we seemed to agree not to mention her affair or the state of our marriage. That suited me perfectly. I already knew what I planned to do, and I had no intention of revealing it too soon. Meanwhile, things with Heather McDarrell were becoming more intense. Every Thursday, when my work kept me in Inverness, she came over. She'd cook dinner, stay the night, and tell her neighbors she was visiting an elderly aunt each week. By mid-September, everything began to fall apart, or more accurately, everything surfaced quite literally. One Sunday morning, while I was making breakfast, I heard someone retching in the bathroom. Moments later, Sierra appeared in the doorway, pale and clutching her robe. "Ross, could you make me some weak tea? No milk, no sugar," she murmured, leaning on the frame. "I'm going to lie down." "Sure, Sierra," I answered. Then I asked, "How far along are you?" Her shoulders sagged. "I don't know," she said quietly. "We'll talk later." And she turned and shuffled back to bed. She spent most of that day resting. The weather was gorgeous, so Ryan and I went for a drive through the countryside to enjoy the autumn colors. We stopped at a small inn for lunch and didn't return until late afternoon. Ryan collected a bundle of colorful leaves for his mother and proudly gave them to her when we got home. She was curled up on the couch in sweatpants and a loose sweater, trying to smile as he excitedly recited facts about why leaves change color, facts he'd learned from me, even adding that in other countries, autumn is called fall because the leaves drop. I felt proud of him in that moment. Later that evening, after Ryan had gone to bed, Sierra and I had a serious, though oddly calm, conversation. She explained that she had already visited the doctor earlier in the week after her first wave of nausea. The tests confirmed she was pregnant, around 6 to 8 weeks along. She hadn't told Connor yet. He had already accepted a place at Edinburgh University and was set to leave the Glen in only a few days. "So now you expect me to act like none of this ever happened?" I asked her. "You knew this was temporary, Ross," she replied softly. "Now that Connor's leaving, it's over." "I can't just wipe it all away," I said. "After months of you being with him, and now you're carrying his baby?" "I'm begging you," she whispered. "Please and forgive me. Pretend it never happened." "You've always been a loyal husband and father, Ross. A child deserves a life filled with love, and I hope you can understand that." "That's not the way I see it," I replied evenly. "As far as I'm concerned, you and Connor need to accept the consequences of your decisions. Don't expect me to bear that burden alongside you. This baby isn't going to be a problem," she whispered defensively. "Ryan will be glad to have a little brother or sister. It won't even change things that much for us financially." "You're missing the point," I told her, my voice flat. "I'm not looking to fix this marriage, and I will not take responsibility for a child who isn't mine." Her eyes flew wide in disbelief, tears spilling down her face. "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed, running from the room. A few days later, while I was away on a trip, Sierra filed for divorce. Her petition included precise dates and details of her affair with Connor McDarrell, and she even admitted the child she was carrying belonged to him. For all the time she spent hiding from reality, I thought surely now she would have to face it. She'd have to deal with the fallout on her own. When the divorce papers arrived, she called me in hysterics. She couldn't comprehend how I could be so merciless. But all I could think was, hadn't she been merciless to me first? That weekend I refused to return to Lochmagandy. I wouldn't step into the house where Sierra lived. I wouldn't let anyone believe there was anything left to salvage in our marriage. It was a painful choice, but I told myself soon I'd at least have weekend visits with Ryan, even if I had to make the drive from Inverness each time. The same day Sierra received the court summons, I phoned Heather McDarrell. I told her plainly that my marriage to Sierra was ending, and that whatever friendship Heather and I had was over too. I had enjoyed her company, yes, but I needed no further entanglements, especially knowing Donnie was serious about her. In the months that followed, others tried to interfere. Lady Faith, for instance, confronted me furiously, insisting I had betrayed some promise to her. I reminded her I had never once promised Sierra I wouldn't seek a divorce. Heather's kindness to me had been free of conditions, no secret bargains, no hidden deals. And frankly, I doubted Lady Faith would risk the humiliation of her daughter's affair, becoming public knowledge during the legal proceedings. A solicitor had once explained Scottish law to me. After 2 years of separation, either spouse could file for divorce, without needing the other's consent. I could have chosen to wait. But instead, I filed immediately on grounds of adultery, naming Connor directly. It wasn't done purely out of spite, though I'll admit, publicly exposing him brought a measure of grim satisfaction. More than that, I wanted no legal tie to Sierra's unborn child. Had I remained married, the law could have imposed parental obligations on me, responsibilities I would never accept for a child that wasn't mine. Let Connor and Sierra face that together. The child support agency would ensure Connor paid his share. I just needed the divorce finalized quickly, before the nightmare worsened. Family lawyers, of course, were as greedy as any barristers. Still, I made Sierra a generous offer. She could keep the cottage at Lochmagandy, and I agreed to provide monthly support for Ryan until he turned 18. Our solicitors dragged things out, each angling for more money, so the process took months to complete. Eventually, though, Sierra had no choice but to accept reality. Our marriage was finished. Word reached me later that she had secured some financial arrangement with Connor's family. Her pregnancy went smoothly. By late April, only weeks after the divorce was finalized, she gave birth to a baby girl. I rented a small flat in Inverness and settled into a new routine. Every other Saturday, I drove to Lochmagandy to spend the day with Ryan. I had no interest in Sierra's personal life anymore, but Ryan adored his new sister, and both Sierra and I encouraged him to be a kind and caring big brother. From the outset, I made my boundaries clear. I told Sierra plainly I wouldn't participate in any family outings during my visits. She tried setting me up a few times, ambushing me into group moments, but eventually she stopped. Soon enough, Ryan would simply be waiting for me at the door when I arrived, ready for us to spend time together without distractions. I wasn't unkind to Sierra, just detached. Our exchanges never went beyond polite small talk. A word about the weather, an update on Ryan's schooling, nothing more. Time passed, and I slowly adjusted to a quieter way of living. My social life thinned out compared to what it had been, though every now and then I'd find myself in brief, passing romances. I wasn't searching for anything permanent, and oddly enough, that lack of intent seemed to appeal to a few women I met. Still, I avoided the ones we used to jokingly call bicycles, those who drifted from person to person, desperate for attention. Years rolled by like that until one afternoon I opened the local paper and saw a name I hadn't thought about in ages. Connor McDarrell. According to the announcement, he was engaged. The article painted an idyllic picture of him and his fiancée, whom he had met during their days at Edinburgh University. She came from an aristocratic English family, the kind with old estates and generations of wealth tucked away somewhere in Sussex or Surrey. The write-up practically romanticized it, portraying Connor as the rugged Highlander won over by the elegance of high society. I decided I couldn't let it pass without speaking to her first. Finding her wasn't difficult. Edinburgh has a way of feeling small when you know where to look. She agreed to meet me after I offered only a vague explanation, curiosity outweighing caution. Naturally, I used a false name. We met in one of those dimly lit pubs the city is famous for. Low-beamed ceilings, walls heavy with dark wood, and a constant murmur of voices that blends into the clink of glasses. I recognized her instantly from the photograph in the newspaper. We found a secluded booth, drinks in hand, and she got straight to the point. "What is this about, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, unaware the name wasn't real. "Forgive the secrecy," I replied in a low voice. "I've come to tell you something about Connor McDarrell. Nothing dangerous, just something you should hear before you make a final decision. And you can confirm it yourself, if you wish." Suspicion narrowed her eyes. "All right, I'm listening. But if this is some kind of trick—" "It isn't," I cut in. "Let me ask you, how well do you know Connor's daughter?" Her expression faltered into confusion. "His daughter? What are you talking about?" "So he hasn't mentioned her," I said quietly. "You'll meet her eventually, I expect. She lives in Loma Gandhi with her mother." "That can't be true," she said quickly, shaking her head. "We've visited his parents in Loma Gandhi more than once. No one, neither Connor nor his family, has ever said anything about a child." "She exists," I told her evenly. "Her name is Flora. She's 5 years old and due to start school this autumn. She lives with her mother and older half-brother not half a mile from Connor's parents' house." I allowed myself a small pause before adding, "She's a sweet girl. You'd probably like her. Though I imagine supporting her for the next 20 years might put a dent in your household finances." Her face hardened. "Do you have proof of this?" I slid a document across the table, a copy of the divorce decree naming Sierra's affair with Connor. "You can verify it," I said. She scanned the paper quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I can't believe he never told me," she muttered. "We're supposed to be married, and you're telling me he has a child with another woman living practically next door to his parents?" "I'm sorry you had to find out like this," I replied. "It isn't a secret. You would have discovered it sooner or later. Perhaps he planned to tell you himself before the wedding. Just don't mention my involvement. Better you know now than after the vows are spoken. Marriage isn't just about loving him. It's about taking on everything that comes with him." She drew in a sharp breath. "I'll need time to think, Mr. Johnson. But, thank you. May I keep this?" She lifted the decree slightly. "Of course," I said. "It's yours." She rose, gave me a curt nod, and left without another word. I stayed behind, sipping my drink, feeling a quiet surge of satisfaction as she disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her again, and, if my instincts were correct, neither would Connor McDarrell. A month later, while picking up Ryan, I casually mentioned I'd seen Connor's engagement notice in the paper. "He was going to get married," Sierra said, narrowing her eyes at me. "But someone told his fiancée about Flora, and she called it off. I hope that wasn't you, Ross." "Me?" I replied, feigning surprise. "Why would I do something like that?" Later that same year, I found myself in yet another pub, talking to a stranger about the breathtaking views from Mount Loma Gandhi. A colleague had insisted I meet the man, an old hill walker who knew the area better than anyone. To my surprise, he turned out to be a close friend of John McKee, the man Sierra called her father, who had died in that terrible car accident before she was born. When the old hiker learned I had once been married to Sierra, his eyes widened. He asked why we'd divorced, and I gave him the short version. She'd cheated and gotten pregnant by another man. He let out a slow whistle. "Well," he said at last, "the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Ross." "What are you getting at?" I asked, my brow furrowing in confusion. "Did you ever realize that John McKee wasn't actually Sierra's biological father?" he said calmly. I froze, stunned. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" He gave a slow nod. "I am. And here's the cruel part. John never knew either. If he had, Maybe he'd still be alive right now. I thought he died in a car crash, I murmured, struggling to follow where this was leading. That's the version the insurance company accepted, he explained quietly. But the truth? Well, it's far messier. He hesitated, eyes narrowing as if weighing whether to speak further, then leaned closer and dropped his voice. After everything you've told me, I think I can trust you to keep this secret. John came to see me right after he discovered his wife's affair, he continued. He was devastated, absolutely gutted. I tried everything to comfort him, but nothing I said could reach him. I never shared what he told me with anyone, not even her. She never knew he'd found out because later that same day, John drove straight off a cliff. He fell silent for a long moment, lost in thought, before letting out a weary sigh. I still ask myself if there was anything I could have done to pull him back from the edge. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe what she did to him was simply too much to bear. His gaze turned distant for a heartbeat, then sharpened as he looked me in the eye and said softly, "Be thankful you're not walking in John's shoes." After that conversation, I buried myself in work for a while. Eventually, I managed to land a senior position overseeing the Scottish Highlands Infrastructure Division for a large telecommunications firm. Professionally, it felt like a major win, though I wouldn't have described myself as happy back then. Things began to shift slowly. Looking back now, I think meeting Ursula was the moment everything really turned. She's a fiery woman from Hamburg who walked away from her husband after finding him too close for comfort with his assistant. Seeking a clean break, she ended up here in the Highlands. Ursula loves hiking the hills, despises pretension, and faces life with a blunt honesty that mirrors my own. Truthfully, she can be temperamental, though most people would call her striking, even magnetic. We've shared a home for 3 years now. As for marriage, we're open to it someday, but neither of us is in any rush to put it on paper. Ryan turned 18 last month. Next year, he'll be heading to Inverness for university. Until then, he spends most of his free evenings at Sierra's place in Lochmagundi, usually in the company of Heather McDarrell. Heather didn't exactly resist when Ryan made his intentions known. Given her status, she's set to inherit leadership one day. She seems determined to uphold the old family tradition of generosity, whatever it might cost her personally. I see Ryan at least once a week when he comes into Inverness. Over the past year, I've walked him through the entire family history, why I divorced his mother, why I cut ties with her and his half-sister Flora. It hasn't been easy for him to reconcile what his mother and her circle have done, but that hasn't stopped him from enjoying Heather's company over the past year. Of course, Ryan's involvement with Heather isn't entirely accidental. I was the one who put her forward for the position in the first place. Her husband, Donnie, yes, that Donnie, runs an animal feed supply company, complete with a massive warehouse near Inverness. He and Heather live out in Lochmagundi, though Donnie is rarely around, always on the road meeting suppliers and clients. They've been married for 10 years and have a 6-year-old daughter who spends most of her time with her grandmother, Lady Faith. I'm fairly certain Donnie has no clue about Ryan and Heather's arrangement, and I'm not planning on telling him, not yet anyway. I'll wait until Ryan loses interest in her, and then we'll see what happens when Donnie finally learns the truth. Donnie's outward charm masks a calculating, hardened core. He's not the type to explode recklessly, but I can't imagine him brushing this off. When the truth comes out, and it will, I doubt the fallout will be quiet. If I had to bet, I'd say Donnie will retaliate, cold and methodical, in his own brutal way.